A good day to all, and thank you for allowing me to visit your homes today and to share with you my thoughts and insights on how COVID 19 is affecting the practice of public relations here in the Philippines and in the other parts of the ASEAN region. My name is Norman Agatep. I'm currently the president of the Public Relations Society of the Philippines, and my presentation for you is titled Finding Purpose in the Shadows, or PR, in the Age of COVID 19. As you all realize, we are finding ourselves in the shadows because of this pandemic. We've been practicing PR very differently, but that's because we are in rather challenging circumstances today. So, for my discussion with you, I'd like to tackle three topics. First of all, we shall discuss those shadows or the challenges for the PR industry that's experiencing a crisis because the entire world is in a crisis. I'd also like to segue to the silver lining, and this I call purpose as the way forward because I feel very strongly that understanding our purpose as practitioners and knowing the purposes of our respective brands and staying true to that is the right way forward despite the crisis we're in. And finally, I'd like to summarize all those thoughts and insights through one more slide. So let's talk about the shadows. If you are a PR practitioner that's operating through a company or a brand, or if you are a professional, PR professional that's working in an agency, working with various brands, all of you, all of us are experiencing the shadows. And for us, it means number one, working remotely. And that's a difficult thing to do for us communication practitioners. We are used to speaking directly with our clients and engaging with them on a face-to-face basis, but now we are compelled to work remotely. Some of us are also experiencing reduced working hours. If not that, we've experienced a lot of reduced budgets, especially from brands who feel it is important for them to cut down on communication expenses and to work on other items in their own agendas that will help them survive this pandemic. And for most of the brands we've been handling, they've already communicated somehow that they are canceling several projects and events, especially those that will be mounted outside work, outside their offices, because of social distancing. So for brands and for us who are working with these brands, these are just some of the realities that compose the shadows that we are working within. But even for the stakeholders with whom we would like to communicate, they too, these consumers, are in the shadows for various reasons. Number one, they are still in isolation. And so while they could have experienced your communication through various channels outside, they are now in isolation and have limited access to your communication. In fact, they've already developed a stay-at-home mindset, and because they are homebodies and are again limited within the confines of their homes, there are less chances for them to be able to experience your brand. Whereas before this pandemic, they would experience your brands in your stores, in your restaurants, in the areas where you operate, wherever you conduct your activities, and so on and so forth. Also, because of the pandemic, our consumers and stakeholders are reducing their spend. Because these are times, again, where it is not exactly a bright idea to be spending so much given our situation. Instead, people are more proactive with regard to their health and wellness, and that is what is preoccupying their minds instead of spending for travel, for instance, or other luxuries which they do not want to get into these days. Now, all indications are showing that in the few weeks of this pandemic and beyond, right, the shadows that we've experienced during our lockdown while we are on quarantine are also shadows that we will be experiencing after and before we find a cure to this disease. In fact, for us who are working again with brands, a lot of us, most of us, I would suspect, would still consider working remotely because we've already demonstrated during these weeks that we can get some work done. Many of us will continue to work remotely, even working at reduced hours and going through our jobs knowing fully well that our clients and our own brands have reduced budgets rather, and canceled projects and events. And for the consumers and stakeholders with whom we would like to talk, they will choose to be in isolation. While in many markets in the ASEAN region, we've been asked by our governments to stay at home, they will choose, our consumers and stakeholders will again decide to distance themselves socially and to stay at home while there is no cure to the pandemic or no vaccine yet for COVID-19. And they too will be spending less and will still be anxious with regard to their health and wellness. So these are realities that we practitioners of public relations do have to deal with. These are new realities that we have to contend with. We've just got to find our way to work through these new normals, these new realities, and get our work across nonetheless. So the question right now, therefore, is where is the silver lining? With all the limitations that we are experiencing in our work, where does the silver lining lie? And I feel there are three major points to consider for this. First of all, despite their isolation, our stakeholders, the people that we want to communicate with, will always be hungry for stories. They will not prefer to live as hermits, detached from the world. They will still find in their isolation a way to connect with other humans, a way to find out what other people are doing, what companies and brands are doing, and they will definitely seek out those channels that can deliver to them those stories. For us as practitioners, despite the fact that we are working remotely, practicing our craft at home, we will always have a story to say. So the challenge and the question is, how do we get those stories out to the people or stakeholders who are hungry to receive those stories? I feel our purpose as PR practitioners during and after the pandemic is to find and to build the proper narratives that our stakeholders need and want to hear. Once we realize that that is our purpose right now, to deliver the stories that people crave for, then we find meaning in what we do and we will find the ways to get our work out to these people. So once again, our purpose as PR practitioners in this era of COVID-19 is to build brand purpose. And we can do that several ways. But first is to ask ourselves, for the brands that we are working with, what have these brands done to help in this situation where everyone is anxious and panicking, everyone is seeking refuge from the disease? What has your brand done to help? This is an important question because after the pandemic, the brands that have been able to contribute to this discussion, to demonstrate compassion in a pandemic, are the ones that our stakeholders will eventually remember. Our stakeholders will remember also those brands that did nothing to become more compassionate when we were called to be compassionate. So, how have we demonstrated that we protect our own employees? And how do we support our customers? For instance, in the Philippines, and I'm sure in many ASEAN countries as well, restaurants have closed down and have announced that they will not be operating in the time of the pandemic and the lockdowns to protect their own employees, right? And to ensure, of course, that customers do not get the disease in their own stores. This is a very simple and basic way of showing that brands care for their employees and care for their customers, right? But there are other ways, of course, by which brands can demonstrate that they care for employees. For groceries and supermarkets, for example, I know here in the Philippines that some brands have announced that they have created shuttle services for their own employees so that their employees can attend to the need of customers who, during this emergency, can still find time to go to the grocery and purchase some goods that they need at this time. So those are simple examples of how we show and communicate that we protect our employees and support our customers. Number two, be the business that people need you to be, right? So while, for example, here in the Philippines, retail is not very active, clothing shops have closed, we have nonetheless some entrepreneurs there in the fashion industry who are crafting protective equipment that can be distributed to frontliners, because that is the business that we need them to be. They are experts at crafting clothes, then therefore they use that talent for whatever society needs at the moment. Or we have alcohol brands, for example, companies that produce liquor like gin, and using nonetheless their facilities to instead produce more alcohol that can disinfect, hand sanitizers, and so on, because that is the business that we need people to be in right now. So that's again a way of demonstrating their compassion for society. And third, if they do not have those types of resources or skills to be able to produce products that our people need right now, then these companies can direct resources instead to people who can help. Maybe donating food to our frontliners, maybe donating money for people who are trying to research about this disease. If we do have those resources as brands, maybe these are activities that can be treated as CSR projects, which we can bank on and which we can use as stories to tell people. And once people do read about these, they would feel better about these companies and assured that these companies are here for the long haul and would like to help the community where they are contributing. So, in other words, what you do to help today will define how people will see you post COVID-19. So, if we just focus on that question and really think about it and do something about it, this would fuel the many stories that we can craft, and regardless of the limitations that we as PR practitioners are in, right? With just this question and this point in mind, we will have a lot to do to help our brands combat the crisis that the entire world is facing. But there are also other challenges which I would like to focus on, and I think that we as PR practitioners should take on as challenges. We do realize that people will choose to distance themselves even after the lockdown. So, as brands and as communicators of brands, how do we bring them together non-physically? Is there a way, because people would not like to be hermits but would like to connect with others and still feel as part of a community, is there a way to create PR programs and PR tools that will help bring people together? There are some sports apparel brands, for example, in the Philippines that have created mobile apps that encourage consumers to be one in one community, exercising and doing their best to keep physically fit during these times of COVID-19. Or there are brands, for example, that are sponsoring entertainment. So musicians in the Philippines, for example, have banded together, and brands have supported this effort because they know that these musicians can entertain a very demoralized society that we have right now. No? So these are ways by which brands and maybe us as PR practitioners can find ways to bring people together even non-physically. Number two, people will be homebodies, and therefore the challenge for us in brands and communicators of brands is how do we bring our brand experience to these people at home. I know brands in the Philippines, for example, quick service restaurants that are making available their restaurant food somehow to people at home, no? Apart from just delivering the fast food products that these consumers want and crave for. Many quick service restaurants are making the frozen versions of those food available so that consumers can purchase them in groceries, bring them home, and replicate the brand experience that they used to experience at the restaurant. So again, how can we make or communicate the brand wherever the consumer is? And in this case, it's the home. And number three, people will prioritize physical and mental health these days. And so therefore, how do we join this conversation even if we are not a multivitamin brand and so on? I mentioned a while ago how sports apparel is joining the conversation and encouraging people to stay fit even while they're at lockdown in their own homes, these people, right? Or various consumers. So these are challenges. The idea is to take into consideration how people are thinking and what they're doing right now, and still finding ways for the brands that we work with to communicate these brands with the people, despite the fact that we cannot see each other face to face. Right? So some final thoughts as we close today's session. Once again, all of us, PR practitioners and even our stakeholders, are experiencing very extraordinary times. We cannot afford to do our practice of public relations as we normally did in ordinary times. It's just not going to work. Consumers have a different mindset. Consumers are feeling differently than before. Consumers are away from where they used to be. And our challenge really is how do we operate given the circumstances of the people or stakeholders we want to reach. Number two, we certainly have to accept new realities, new confines, and work with that. Digital is obviously a good choice. How else might we be able to communicate with our stakeholders who are in isolation and in their homes? Number three, it's very crucial for us to stay true to our role and purpose as communicators. Because if we realize that purpose, that we are here to communicate the brands that we work with, no obstacle, no confines should stop us from being able to penetrate that and to reach our customers creatively. We here in the ASEAN region are known for that, for being creative and nonetheless being able to reach our targets. And finally, find your brand's purpose in the context of the world today. What can our brands do? Given the situation of our stakeholders, given what they want and need to hear, to experience and so on, how can we make these stakeholders hear that and experience that while being true to our brand? And by the way, maybe our brands are going to change totally after this pandemic. Maybe now is a great time as public relations practitioners to figure out if our brand purpose ought to be the same as they were before this pandemic. Maybe there's a renewed energy to be more humanitarian and to redefine the true purpose of the brands that we carry based on the learnings that we've experienced during COVID-19. So once again, these are very difficult times. I know we are in the shadows still, but as PR practitioners, we ought to find the courage to move forward and to cross all barriers so that we can do a great job for the brands that we speak for and to make a big difference in this world, not only now while we are in the shadows, but certainly in a way that will give hope to people who are in the shadows and to usher them forward when eventually we leave COVID-19 as a thing of the past. Thank you once again. This is Norman Agatep of the Public Relations Society of the Philippines. Good day.